So the conversation about faith usually goes something like this. When you talk to somebody about your beliefs, they ask, do you believe in God? And if the answer is yes, I do believe. So the question is, well, what's the proof? Like, what proof do you have of God's existence? What do you back it up with? What evidence is there? Or if someone says, then I don't believe in God, why? Because there's no proof. I mean, prove it. If you prove it to me, I'll believe, but it hasn't been proven. I'm a scientific thinker, so I don't really believe. And all people say, I'm not quite sure. Everyone has their take on the question, do you believe in God? And I think that whole conversation is based on a wrong premise. The idea of do I believe, I don't believe, is there proof, is there no proof? It's a funny conversation if you actually think about it. It's a little bit like the conversation, do you think there's life on other planets? If I ask you, do you think there's life on other planets? Do you? Do you think there's life on other planets? No? Maybe? Yes?
Yes.
Not proven yet, right? So does that mean there's not life on other planets?
Exactly.
If it's not,
Which planets have been?
There's Martians and Mars.
well, we've only been to one,
Yeah.
and is there life on this planet? That's also a good question. So we haven't found life on any other. So what do you think there is? Some will say, I think there is. Some will say, no, I don't think so. Some will say, maybe. What's the point of this conversation? Like, what are we trying to get? What are you basing your opinion on? You haven't been to any of these planets to check it out. You may have read a few books or watched a few TED Talks or something like. Now you know something about the topic of life on other planets. So to have an opinion on this, what right do you have to have an opinion on whether there's life on other planets or not? In fact, what does it mean to have an opinion on something like that we don't really have a clue about anyway? Like, it's just an uninformed opinion.
It's speculation.
Yeah. So this, I reckon no. Okay, whatever. So how is that different to our opinion of whether God exists or not? Same thing. It's your speculation. I think he does. No, I don't think so. Like, based on what? What are you basing your yes or your no on there?
What you want to believe in.
Yeah. That's what you want? Okay, so go ahead, believe in it. Or you don't want to? Fine. The basis of that conversation is like a little bit not apprehensive, it's a bit presumptuous. To say that I have an opinion on God's existence or not, it's a bit presumptuous. Who might have an opinion on that, whether he exists or not? Like, who might have an opinion whether there's life on other planets? Like, what do I know about it? And yet, we all pushed into having a position on this one. You got to these days particularly, it's not enough just to say, I'm not into theology. You're not allowed to say that anymore. You have to, either you're in or you're out. You believe or you don't believe. It used to be on the census, very few people would put in atheist. Because I'm not an atheist. I don't believe. Just maybe not religious. I'm not sure. But more and more people put, no, I'm atheist. I've got an opinion on this. These days you've got to say, I don't think there's a God. Based on what? Do you say there isn't or there is? Where is this whole conversation going? But the difference is that whether there's life on other planets or not doesn't really impact our daily life all that much. Whether there's a God or not does. It totally transforms the way you live every single moment of your life. If there is a God or there isn't. And so it's a more important question perhaps than life on other planets, but the way we approach it is the same, and I think it's based on an incorrect premise. And that is that we can have an opinion on such a thing. Or we should have an opinion. We should develop an opinion. I do believe, I don't believe. I have faith, I don't have faith. So what I want to explore in this class is maybe a different approach to the question of faith. rather than doing what has been done customarily to try and bring proofs that God exists and base a faith on that, which are then open to disproofs and counter arguments. So let's take a totally different angle, one that I think is actually more scientific. Let's, rather than argue back and forth and try and prove things logically to push into a corner somebody you've got to believe because look at all these proofs, why don't we do it differently and just test faith, try it out, make an assumption. Let's just assume faith, try and live it, and see if it works. Either it's going to work or it's not going to work. If it doesn't work, so then okay, we'll have to come to a conclusion based on that. And if it does, we have to come to a different conclusion. But why not try it out, assume it, and then see what happens? Because to go around in circles and argue the logic of God's existence, that's a bit silly. You're using the wrong tool. You're using logic to try and understand God, who is not a logical construct. You're using intellectual argument, rational thought, to try and grasp something that's not a concept, not a rational concept in the first place. The way one of the great mystics, the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, he says it, is that if somebody would tell you that this idea is so deep that you can't even hold on to it with your hands, you'd say that's a silly thing to say. An idea you can't hold with your hands. You don't describe an idea as being so deep, so big that you can't even hold on to it with your hands. The hands are not the tool to hold on to an idea. In a similar way, to talk about God as being something that you can or cannot understand is a silly premise. God is not a concept that you use your brain to capture. He's not an intellectual thought that you can prove its existence or not. It's not something that your mind can grasp. So utilizing the mind to try and argue for or against is just the wrong tool. It's like trying to use your hand to grab an idea. Your brain is used to grab an idea. Your hand is used to grab an object. But to grab God, to grasp God, you can't do it with your hand, not with your mind either. You can grasp God with your soul. You can just try him out. Let's try out faith. Let's see if it works. And then we can come to a conclusion. But it's not about our opinion whether he is or he isn't, he exists or he doesn't exist. That's not where faith is. So let's explore a more Kabbalistic view of where faith is, and let's try and just experience it. Experience that faith, and we'll see for ourselves if it works. We can try it in life, in our daily life, and see if it works. So first of all, fascinatingly, the Kabbalists define faith very differently to the way most others would. Usually faith, when we're talking about faith in God, what does it mean? We usually understand that as meaning believing that God exists. Having faith means that God exists. You believe that God exists. If you don't have faith, that means you don't believe he exists, or you don't have that faith at least. Whereas if you have faith, it means you believe he exists. The Kabbalists say, no, you don't need faith for that. For God's existence, you don't need faith. You're wasting faith if you use it on his existence, because you don't need it for that. God's existence is obvious. It's natural. That's something that needs no faith to grasp. The way the Kabbalists look at the world is that the axiom of existence is God's existence. Everything else is the question. The existence of everything else, that needs to be explained. That needs to be proven. The existence of God, that's obvious. The existence of the essence, of the core of everything, that's God, that's obvious. Everything else needs to be explained. In other words, the Kabbalists actually spend time trying to bring a logical proof that the world exists. That's the thing that needs to be explained. A logical proof that God exists, that's ridiculous. God's existence is it's beyond logic, doesn't need to be grasped. What doesn't make sense is the existence of the world, of the universe, of everything else. That needs to be explained. So the way the Kabbalist views the world is God's existence is for sure. Me, I'm not so sure about. I have to explain how I exist. My own existence, that needs a bit more proof. That needs a bit more convincing. But God's existence, that's obvious. So, if we can experience that viewpoint, the viewpoint of the Kabbalist, where God's existence is obvious, the world's existence needs to be explained, so then we will view ourselves and our existence and our life totally differently, and we'll be living with the faith that the Kabbalists had. So that's our point of departure, to try and view the world from the Kabbalist view and to experience that level of faith. So to do that, we'll explore a teaching, a Kabbalistic teaching on how the world indeed does exist. The Kabbalists' first question is, how did the world come into existence? What does it mean that this world exists? If your starting point is God's existence, God is. So, how did this world come about? God did not come about because God is an essence, is an absolute existence, doesn't have a beginning or an end, doesn't appear. But this world did appear. This world was created. It had a beginning. What was that beginning? How did it begin? How does it exist? And the terminology the Kabbalists use for creation is that it was yesh me'ayin, which means that the world came about as something, yesh, from nothing, me'ayin. Something from nothing. Meaning that the history of the world, of the universe, of existence is that there was a point where there was nothing. As far as the world is concerned, there's nothing. God exists, but nothing else. And from that nothingness came something. Meaning the basis, the foundation of existence is nothingness. And from nothingness came something. God created something out of nothing. He didn't take ingredients to create the world. He didn't have tools, have raw materials, and from that he created the world. He created it out of nothing. Which seems to be an obvious point, nothing too earth-shattering yet in that the world was created from nothing. It had to, eventually, if you trace back, there had to have been a beginning where existence came about. Before that moment of existence coming about, there was nothing. Then there was something. You have to say at some point, whatever you trace existence back to, there's a certain point where it had to begin. A beginning means there was nothing, then there's something. God created something out of nothing. But if we analyze what it means to create something out of nothing, we realize that the world that we inhabit, that we're quite comfortable and used to, is not exactly as meets the eye. Being an existence that comes out of nothing changes what you are. It changes the definition of what you are. And it changes our view of what we assume is just reality. Again, quoting the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, in his work of Tanya, in the second section, he describes this creative process. And he differentiates between creating something from nothing, which only God can do, to creating something from something, which we can do too. We're also creators. But when we create, it is always, by definition, something from something. We cannot make something from nothing.
Or music.
Music, what is music?
Well, something from your head, but it's in theory from nothing.
Well, you can't make music without notes, without an instrument, without a voice. There has to be something that is creating it. The creativity, even the creativity part of music, you could create a whole new song, but it's a combination of existing things, existing notes and existing sounds, and you're rearranging them, and that's what makes it new. When we call something new, a new creation, it's relatively new, meaning this particular combination wasn't there before, but the ingredients that make it were all there before. Which is why you can't come up with a new note that never existed before, or a new color that never existed before. You can't imagine a color that doesn't exist. You could combine colors to make a new shade that's slightly different, but it's a combination of existing colors. A completely new color you can't.
You find new tools to discover colours that were there, but you didn't have the right tools to discover them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're always there.
So, any example of human creativity, from the most simple to the most complex, is taking existing reality and rearranging it. Cooking, when you cook, so then you have to take ingredients and make something out of it. Although sometimes it seems like my wife makes something out of nothing, but there is always something. There is something there. That there's nothing in the fridge, then there's nothing to make. If the pantry's empty, you can't create something. But you can make amazing things from ingredients, but you've got to have the ingredients.
How does a Hungarian make chicken soup? He first steals the chicken.
You must be Romanian.
I must be.
So you can't come up with the possibility of making something out of absolute nothing. This table, the chair, the building, everything has raw materials that are rearranged. Even the creativity we have is taking ideas that exist and moving them. I remember as a kid we were learning in school about inventors. Great inventors who came up with amazing ideas, and we were learning about inspiration, that what inspired them. And I remember being really confused because we were taught that an invention means something new. What makes something an invention? It didn't exist before. And then the teacher was saying, and what inspired it? What inspired it? So, like the story, whether it's true or not, the apple falling on the head. So what inspired the invention? And I was saying, well, then it's not an invention if something inspired it. Because it's coming from an idea that is already. I remember being really confused about the idea of inspiration when I was a kid. Like, what does it mean to... It's not inventing something if you were inspired by another idea. It's just taking an idea and... But that is, in human terms, that's what invention means. We don't actually invent something totally new. We take an idea and we take it to the next step. To the point where many of our inventions are very closely parroting nature. If you think about many of the things that even technology that we have, they resemble nature in a way. Like even a car, it looks like a horse. I mean, it's got 4 legs. It's got these things in the front that look out to the front. It's got an inside where all its inner workings are. It's even got an exhaust at the back. It's got everything that it looks like it's modeled on nature. You would think that inventing a car is nothing like a horse. I mean, a horse is what we used to ride, and now a car, but the invention should be like totally, completely new. But no, it's inspired by what we used to do on the horse, but now it's advanced to be a car.
They have horses' carriages, they
Mm-hmm.
call them that.
Mm-hmm.
And to prevent banknotes being counterfeited, they use the colours in butterflies as well.
That's right. So we as humans are limited in our creativity to what we've been given, and we're unlimited in what we can create from what we've been given. There's no limit to how many songs that we can invent. There's not going to get a point where, okay, we've written all the music there is, it's finished. Even though sometimes it seems that they're just repeating songs, like slightly changing them, but in theory, we can come up with a whole new genre of music. It'll be based on what we have. But that is human creativity. That's as far as we can go. But it's unlimited how far we can go with it. You can play infinite songs. You can make infinite paintings. You can create infinite new inventions, but it'll all be based on what we have. The one thing that a human cannot do is create something from nothing. And the one thing that God did at the beginning is had nothing, based on nothing, with no inspiration coming from anywhere, no model that he's copying, no ingredients that he's basing himself on, no prior existence that is being carried over or it resembles, a totally new existence, something from nothing.
Maybe that's why magicians try and make people in awe, like it looks like the rabbit's out of the hat.
Correct. Yeah, that's what it is. And
Yeah.
it didn't happen.
Yeah.
You know that rabbit was there somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the magic, the awe.
Right. So, apart from us not being able to mimic something from nothing, what difference does it actually make that the world was created out of nothing, whereas we create things out of something? What does that tell us about the world? What does that make? How does that define the world differently? Why is this important? It's a cool fact, but why is it actually important? Because something made from something and something made from nothing are totally different. And the difference is that the something made from something does not require the maker to have any further input for its survival. Whereas a something made from nothing requires constant input from the maker to continue its existence. When a person makes something, whether it be a cake or a painting or a piece of music, that person does not need to give any further attention. Once it's made, it's done. So then the thing has its own existence, its own entity, and it can continue to exist without the person's input. So the person can make a dinner, put it on the table, and leave. And the dinner will continue to exist until it gets eaten, without the person who made it having to continue to look after it. It exists. The person who made the chair I'm sitting on, we don't know who, where, or when. They may not exist anymore, but the chair continues to exist. They made it, and it's done. And so too with the painting, and a building, and a piece of music. You create it, and it's got its own existence now. It doesn't need you anymore. It can continue to exist. This is not so for something created out of nothing. Because when something's created from something, the maker has introduced the new combination, but the fundamental building blocks of that thing existed before the maker came along and will exist after the maker leaves. The ingredients of the cake were there, and the baker of the cake put the ingredients together, baked it, but the existence is independent of the baker and continues to exist. Whereas something from nothing doesn't work that way. When something is made out of nothing, it has nothing to fall back on. It has no basis other than what the maker inserted into it, what the maker gave it. And therefore its existence is continually dependent on the maker. The creator has to continue to give it existence, otherwise it won't exist. Meaning that the world can only continue to exist as long as God is willing it to exist. He has to keep creating. Creation was not a once-off thing that he did once, that he created and it is, but it is a constant thing that is happening every moment. Because if God does not continue to create, the world will not continue. Because the world has no independence to fall back on. It has no something that it came from. It has no foundation that it's built on except for God's willing it into existence. To understand this a little bit better, to bring it down a bit more concrete, we'll give an example of perhaps the closest thing we have to creating something out of nothing. That even though human beings cannot create something out of nothing, but there's one power we have that is pretty close to it and can serve as at least a metaphor for it. And that is the power of imagination. When we conjure in our minds an idea, when we make up a scene in our minds, we're sort of creating something out of nothing there. It's not exactly something out of nothing because it's not really out of nothing. We're taking existing pictures and scenes and memories, they do exist. And we're not really making something out of it anyway because it's not really something, it's just a picture, an imaginary picture. So it's not really something, it's not really from nothing, but it's similar to something from nothing. Because if you imagine right now in your mind a cake, or a painting, or a scene, you didn't take anything to make that. You didn't take ingredients to make it. You just pictured it in your mind. You created this scene in your mind. So let's make the scene in our mind of a person sitting in a room at a table with a cake in front of them. We can imagine that. We can picture the cake. We can picture the person's face with their features. You could go really into detail exactly the way that person looks, the facial expression they have. Do they look like they're going to eat the cake or they don't want to eat the cake? You can picture the background, the room that they're in, the table that is in front of them, the curtains on the windows, the light coming in. You can picture everything to the nth degree, every single detail of that entire picture. And then if you stop thinking about that, and you come back to reality, and you look around you to the room you're in, there's no cake, no person, no curtains. We're back here. So where's he? Where's the person who was in the vision? He or she? Mm-hmm. Where is the cake? The table? The curtains? Where have they gone? They're gone. There's not even crumbs left of that cake. There's not even a residue of those curtains. There's nothing left of it because it only existed in your imagination. If your attention has been diverted, it's gone. Maybe you could say it's in your memory somewhere. You know, you do remember it somewhere. But as far as a conscious picture, what happened next in the story? So did he eat the cake? Well, there's no next in the story. Once I stopped thinking about the person sitting at the table, so then they didn't continue to exist. The table didn't continue to exist. The cake didn't exist. It's gone. So it's not like I switched off and they continued along their way and this person decided to eat the cake or not. It's just a figment of my imagination. I created them. So therefore, when I stopped thinking about them, they're gone. Because I created them out of nothing. It's not like if I actually made a cake, where I took ingredients and made a cake. I created the cake in my head, and the person and the scene. It's all gone once I stopped thinking about it. In a similar way, God created the entire universe, something from nothing. Which means he didn't take things and make the universe. He made the universe out of his own decision to make it. He decided and it was. You You could even say he imagined it into existence. Which means that it only exists as long as he keeps imagining it, as long as he keeps willing it, as long as he wants it. If he would stop wanting the world to exist, if God's attention were diverted, as it were, from the universe, then it wouldn't exist, because it has nothing to fall back on. It has no independent basis of existence except for God making it, because it's something from nothing, not something from something. Which is a very different type of existence to what we thought it was. What we look at as being concrete reality, a universe that it's right here, it's real. Yeah, it's real, but what does real mean? It means a real thing that God really imagined and must be continuing to imagine, otherwise it's gone. Its entire existence is based only on God continuing to give it its existence, to pump it into existence. This, calling it God's imagination, is not to belittle the world. When a person imagines something, it's just imaginary. God's imagination is as real as it gets, because we're talking about God. If you imagine that you've made dinner, you're going to be hungry, because nothing happened. Sometimes we do this. We think about what we should do, or we go over a conversation in our own mind with somebody that we should have, and we feel, okay, so that's done. It's actually not, of course. Like, you thought about doing it, but you didn't do anything. Thinking about it does nothing when you're a human. When you're God, thinking is reality. God's thought is reality. That is our reality. So we're not suggesting that the world does not exist, or that the world is an illusion, or it's an imaginary world. It's not imaginary in our level. In our level, it's real. God's imagination is our reality. And God's imagination is very real. But it's not real like we think it is, that it's this concrete set existence, that it is how it is because of itself. It is how it is because God wants it that way. What does that actually mean? So, the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya that what this means is that if God would, let's say, decide that something shouldn't exist, if he would stop creating, stop giving the energy to any existence, it would not just stop existing, it would never have existed. It's completely gone. This is sounds a bit like science fiction. Imagine we're sitting here and we see in front of us, there's a chair right there. And we all agree there's a chair there. We have now explained that all of existence only exists because God continually creates it. He continues giving it its existence. If God, for whatever reason, decided that chair, he doesn't want that anymore. So he doesn't need to zap it away. He doesn't need to explode it. Doesn't need to remove it. All he needs to do is to stop thinking about that chair. Because all of existence exists because God wants it. If he decides, I don't want that to be there, it's gone. But not only it's gone, it never would have been there. Because God is creating not just the physical space and the physical makeup of the chair, but God is creating all the dimensions of the chair, including time. Time is one of the dimensions of this chair. Meaning the chair has a certain height, certain width, certain thickness, certain substance to it, color. It also has a time to it. It's been around for a while. it's a certain age, it's got a history. All of that is actually an element of the creation of this chair. It's space and it's time. If God decides that he doesn't want the chair, he takes away not just its physical space, not just its color, but its time as well, its history. It never was there. Because time is another dimension of creation. What does that mean? How's that possible? We understand time as being a continuum. I was here yesterday, and I'll be here tomorrow, and I've got a history and I've got a future, and time just sort of goes along in the background. It just moves along. But no, God created the world out of nothing. Nothing means that before the world was created, there was nothing. Nothing means not just there was no space, but also there was no time. Time is also a created entity. You know, there's a funny question that is asked by some of the great thinkers and the Kabbalists, that why didn't God create the world earlier? Why did he create the world when he did and not earlier? What was he doing? What was he doing all that time? God is infinite, right? So he's been around forever. The world was created 5,779 years ago, and 6 days of creation, and however you explain that. So what was happening before? For all that time? What was he doing all that time?
He must have decided it's the right time. When he was that many.
How do you say, okay, now's the time? Now, I think I better create the world. If I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. What was he doing the whole time?
Maybe he was busy with other planets.
Yeah, what is that?
Maybe it's
The
with
humans on
targets.
the other planet.
It's a parallel universe. Practicing?
How long does it take to prepare? He had infinity.
No,
You know how we leave things to the last minute,
I know, but we're putting
but this is ridiculous.
we're putting our human thoughts on what God would do, which isn't appropriate. So,
Right,
now.
right. So your mind can boggle. You can actually go a bit nuts with this question. Like, so what was before there was anything? There was nothing. So what? Like, but the question, why didn't God create the world earlier? What was he waiting for? Is an absurd question, because the premise of the question is there's time before, and he's waiting around until the time to create. But time itself is a creation. Time is one of the dimensions of this world. God is not bound by time. He created it. So it wasn't like he was waiting around and, okay, now's the time to do it. There was no time until he created space and time. So not that we understand what we're talking about. We cannot fathom a spaceless or timeless reality. That's just out of our realm because we're in space and time. We're stuck in it. We cannot imagine beyond it. But we can appreciate that just like God is not spatial, he's also not time-bound. So he created space, he also created time out of nothing. There was no time and there was no space, and he created both. Which means that every entity in the world, in the universe, is constantly being recreated every moment out of nothing. Not just spatial creation, but time is also being created every moment. Meaning every moment is being created as a moment. What are we on about here exactly? Where does this take us? What does this matter?
It is a God who is creating.
That our existence is completely and totally dependent on God, and therefore there's nothing about us that is separate, that is distinct, that is removed from him. Our reality is completely a divine reality. This is not just a theological discussion, this is actually very practical. This totally transforms the way we live if we imbibe and absorb this idea. Because if the world's creation didn't happen thousands of years ago, it started thousands of years ago, but it's happening right now, out of nothing. What that means is, this moment that I'm living now is the only true reality. We're being created now with a sense of a past, with an anticipation of a future, but all that exists is this second that is created now. What that means is, nothing binds us. Our past, or what was, even 5 minutes ago or 5 seconds ago, does not bind us, because now is being recreated now. The world is constantly being recreated. The divine energy is being renewed every moment. Because if it wouldn't, it would disappear, like our imaginary scene. So that imaginary scene, because you are the master of that scene, you can decide anything. And anything can happen in that scene. Remember that person sitting at the table with the cake. A rabbit could jump out of that cake, if you want, because it's your imagination. You're in total control of it. In the divine reality, if God is recreating the world at every second, so then anything is possible. Because he's recreating out of nothing. It happens to be that he chooses to recreate the world in a way that has a sense of consequence, of sequence, that one moment follows to another. He didn't create an absurd universe where chairs disappear and rabbits jump out of cakes. He created a universe that can make sense to us, and so he recreates the world in such a way that this moment fits with the last moment. But it doesn't have to be that way. I don't have to be stale. I don't have to feel that what I was yesterday is who I am today and who I'm going to be tomorrow, because that's just life. No, I'm being recreated every moment. There is a fresh moment coming down right now. And so I don't have to define myself by what I was, because there's a new light coming down right now. If we would actually live with that sense, how different would our whole approach be? We would live in the moment, we'd be present in the moment, because that's all that exists. And we wouldn't be limited by what we thought was possible, because the world is being recreated anew. So anything's possible in this moment. You know how sometimes you have a day that's not all that good, you have a bit of a heavy day, and at night things are often worse, they feel worse, and things seem really gloomy, and you think this is going to be terrible, and my future is terrible, and everything's bad. And then you go to sleep, and you wake up in the morning, and you just feel different. It's a different day. And so what was, yesterday I was in that mood, today I'm not in that mood. And things can be good now. What happened? You switched off, you went to sleep, and you woke up and you're feeling fresh. The Kabbalists tell us that the reason that happens is because your soul, when you're asleep, actually leaves you. It gets cleansed, renewed, and gets given back to you when you wake up in the morning. Which is why we thank God we just became alive again. And so you've got a fresh day now, and so now you can actually start anew. But that actually is happening on microscopic scale, every millisecond, every moment, that the entire universe is being recreated every moment. Is getting a new burst of divine energy, a new flow of existence. And so we don't have to wait until tomorrow morning. We can stop and say, whatever mood I was in until now, whatever mode I was in, whatever attitude I was having, whatever assumption I was making about how the world is and how my life is, I don't have to continue that. Because the world is getting a new flow of energy now. And so what was doesn't have to continue. I can shift and change. It's hard because we are temporal beings, stuck in time, stuck in space. But if we stop and view the world, not from our view down here, but from the view above, we can actually switch modes and say, you know what? I'm not going to continue the pattern. I'm going to let a new pattern start. Do you want to ask?
I wanted to ask for the people who are insomniacs, how did their souls get cleansed? Does that mean they've got a lot of build-up because it could be days, weeks or months that they don't sleep? And I don't mean that as a joke.
Yeah. So it's not good to not sleep. And it's not healthy. In fact, the Talmud says that if somebody goes for 7 days without dreaming, so then that's very bad news for their soul. Now, we don't always remember our dreams. Dreaming just means, sorry?
Some people don't remember if they did dream.
Correct. So remember, you don't have to remember or not, but you have to have got into a sleep enough that your mind is doing its dream thing, because that itself, that dreaming process is an expelling of
All the clutter.
the confused thoughts that are just like getting let out, and that's one part of sleep. And the renewal, the replenishing of the soul is another part. It's like plugging in to recharge. So it's without sleep it's not good. So even if people say, well, I just take coffee and work through the night and keep going, and that's not a healthy thing. And eventually that soul is going to exhaust itself to the point where it'll collapse. It needs to be replenished. It can't go on. Maimonides says 8 hours of sleep a night is what we should aim for. That'd be great.
Yeah,
That'd be fantastic.
That'd be really good.
But
You're not dreaming now?
I don't know. I'm not dreaming.
Recent science is set 5 to 7, I think it is. It might be close to 8.
Yeah.
What does it say about oversleeping? Because they say it's not good for you either. What does my mind say about that?
Correct.
You're a sloth.
That too much sleep isn't good for you,
Yeah.
because your soul needs to get back down and do its work. It needs to function.
All right, okay, so that's good. That's interesting.
So
Imagine being able to sleep too much. Wow. Can't even imagine that concept.
yeah.
Like I know people that have slept 2 days or 16 hours. It's like in one shot, like 16 hours in one go.
Yeah.
Imagine it.
Yeah.
It says it's not good for you.
If what?
If you haven't slept for 7 days,
No, I'm not
Yeah,
slept
sure.
7 days. I'm still a few
What about
hours.
the idea that God creates, as you're saying, that the moment, like each moment is a science and not a future or whatever. But what about that ideology that God can see into the future? Like we'll know the name of our child, or know who's gonna marry or something. Like
Mhm.
what about that ideology?
So the idea that God can see into the future is that because God is not limited by time, so from his vantage point, there's no difference between the past, the present, and the future. He's not bound by that. We are bound by it. So we are only conscious of what's happening now, and we have a sense that there'll be a tomorrow, and we have a memory of yesterday, but we can only be in today. We can't go back to yesterday, and we can't go into tomorrow until it comes. Whereas God is beyond time, because He created it. He's creating time, right? So for Him to look into the future or the past is the same as the present. It's all open to Him. More than that, on a deeper level, from what we just said, the future doesn't exist and the past doesn't exist except for God creating it. So He's actually creating the moment. And that opens up a whole
Free choice.
question about free choice. So if He's creating it, what are we doing?
Yeah. And why are we doing if He's doing?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no
Or not
limitations on God.
Right, so if He's creating the world as He wants, that means me too. He's creating me too. He's creating me as He wants. So what I'm doing now is what He wants. So what am I doing? Is it my choice? Or am I just the puppet that's being created? So on that there's a lengthy discussion, which we'll have to save for another time. But the conclusion is we have absolute free choice, even though God absolutely knows what's going to happen. And just like we can't understand God, we can't understand that either.
But God knows what choice we will do.
Yeah. Even though we make the choice.
And He's making the choice for it.
No.
No, we have free
Putting
choice.
us in the way
We have
to
free
make
choice.
That choice He wants.
We have free choice even though He knows what we're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And because we don't understand that, we have free choice. Because we don't understand how God works, He's so beyond us, so we're free to act as we choose, even though that's what God created to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes, yeah. Okay.
what that means practically is, whatever has happened, that's what God wanted. What I do now, I've got to choose. I've got to choose the next move. I can, even things that I chose in the past, but now I can say, God wanted me to do that, maybe to fix it. Maybe I need to fix it now. But what's happened is what's supposed to have happened. What I do now is my choice. I'm responsible for what I do now. If I've done wrong in the past, okay, I shouldn't wallow in the past that I've done wrong in the past, because that's what God wanted. But right now, I have to fix it. If I've done bad, I have to do good now. If I've hurt somebody, I have to make amends. That's now. But what's happened has happened. That was what God wanted.
To go back to what you said about from nothing to something.
Yeah.
Isn't it an idea or a belief or a philosophy that something from nothing? I mean, even the concept of God is created by a thought or by a belief. You believe in God, so therefore God exists.
No, our imagination doesn't create reality. We were created by God. Creation was created by God. Existing was created by God.
He's the
Nothingness and somethingness, all that was created by God. All of these concepts were created by God. The idea of a beginning, that's a concept that God created. Which is why God doesn't have a beginning. He created beginnings. He created creating. He created being. All of these things. Yeah.
You refer to the Kabbalists that they're the ones that talk of what you've been speaking of. Who are they?
So the teaching that we concentrated on today was Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the Alter Rebbe, the author of Tanya, and he expounded on the ideas of the Kabbalists before him, primarily the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the author of the Zohar, and his teachers, the Maggid of Mezrich and the Baal Shem Tov. So he took the Kabbalistic ideas and brought them into intellectual explanations, taking something that is super rational and bringing it into the rational mind that we can talk about it and try and understand
Go
it.
on forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So So what comes out of this discussion, to conclude, is that faith is not believing that God exists. That's a given. From our Kabbalistic vantage point, God's existence. Well, that's God is. God just is. That's not dependent on me and my opinion of Him. The Martians exist if I don't believe in them, or they don't exist if I do believe in them. That's nothing to do with me. God's existence is. That just is. What's interesting is our existence. How do we exist? What is our existence? Our existence is a something that is from nothing, that is constantly being put into existence, placed into existence, re-entered into existence.
Or taken out of
Yes. And it's only as long as God wants it that it is. Which means that if I am, which I'm pretty sure I am,
But there's a God.
then God wants me. And where does He want me? Right here, right now, with exactly the life that I have, and exactly the circumstances I'm in, exactly the challenges that I'm facing, and the difficulties that I have, and the blessings that I have, and the strengths and the abilities and the possibilities, and it's exactly as it's supposed to be. There's not one thing out of place. But that doesn't mean that in a second from now it's going to be the same. And that doesn't mean that it has to continue this way, or that I'm stuck as I am, or my problems have to always be that way. He's put me exactly where I'm supposed to be. And faith means that this is how it's supposed to be, and now I have to choose, what do I make of this?
But you want to happen, God listens to you, and He helps you to be here and talk.
Yeah, I can talk to Him. I can ask Him for help.
Does He help?
Yeah. Does He do everything I ask? Not necessarily. Is everything that I ask really helping? If He did everything I asked, would it really be helping me? Probably also not. So, but I can have a conversation. I can say, God, you know what's best. I don't. But I think maybe this would be good. And we can have the conversation. That's living in a very immediate way. That God is immediate, because God is not the one who created the universe some long time ago and is sitting back and watching. God is intimately involved in every single aspect of the universe, including me and my little life.
Hence your question in the beginning, what is there God?
Right, which in light of this conversation, what type of question is that? Is there a God? Is there anything else? So try this week. Try to visualize this when you're in whatever situation you might be in, particularly if it's a little bit trying or annoying. Stop and say, God created this moment right now exactly how it's supposed to be. There's no should have, could have, would have, maybe. There's no option, there's no other way. This is exactly how it's supposed to be. And I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And if I can accept that, so what do I do next? All right. We'll leave it there. I'll continue next week. God willing.
Thank you. Oh, man.